Hey, you're watching In the Chute. This is where Kalen has a question or comment or something to poke the big red button on me. And for the next few minutes, I try to answer whatever question he has. Kalen, what do you got?
So no big red button. It's just a simple. What are the best ways to feed out beef? We talked to the butcher recently. She was telling us some stuff that she learned from other producers that they have bringing their own animals to butcher there, and they feed them out a little bit differently than us. They use different things. I know you're getting more and more into experimenting with some of the stuff with the cows, the heifers, and the bulls and stuff that we've been butchering. What are some of the things through research, word of mouth, and then just plain experience that you're finding are some of the better ways to feed out butcher animals prior to the slaughtering process, so that it's more flavorful, more enjoyable cuts of meat once they get onto the dinner plate?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot to that I can learn. I'm always trying to learn something. I mean, always try to improve. I think the biggest thing that I like, because we can produce some good tasting meat, some tender, um, healthy meat. But what I want to have is consistency too. I want to be
Mhm.
able to tell a customer, you can expect this and be right and be absolutely exceed their expectations. That's what I hope to do. And if you're consistent, you can say that with a straight face and be confident that that's what they're going to get and they're going to like it. So, um, God, everybody feeds something a little bit different. There's a lot of common things that are fed. Uh, I'm starting to experiment a little bit with um, different types of grains, different types of mixtures. Some things, some people are doing some things with some of the legumes like peas, putting some peas into the feed for a while to sweeten that meat up a little bit. We use molasses in our cob or corn, oats, and barley. Um, Good hay, good grass, let them forage, keeping them happy. I mean, absolutely. It might sound a little goofy, but um, keeping that cow, steer, bull, heifer, whatever you're feeding up, making sure that they are content and not stressed. And I think that makes a lot. I think they'll gain better. Uh, they will taste better. And, you don't have at the time, and not that it doesn't always happen because we've had it happen too. They get adrenalized. And some of these animals, I think they realize at the last minute, hey, this isn't normal. I'm getting on a trailer. Where am I going? It doesn't
Mhm.
sound like a trip for fun.
Right.
So, but others are just, yeah, okay, no big deal. Hey, I'm
Well,
happy to follow you
especially when they're
wherever.
alone too, because they're a herd animal
Oh yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah.
And then you've
Oh yeah.
all of a sudden singled them out. Yeah.
Right. That's right. No, and that's just normal herd behavior. But um the feeding, I like to experiment on the stuff that we're going to eat, because if it doesn't turn out like I want, I haven't disappointed somebody,
Yeah.
and they've spent a
A
lot of
paying
money to
customer.
a paying customer, because that's not what you want, because they may not come back and go, that's not what you told me. And your word means something, or it had better mean something. And so when you have referrals, because somebody said, oh, if they tell you this is what it's going to be, this is what it's going to be, that feels good. That's kind of like a handshake type of an agreement. So having the ability to experiment a little bit is a slow process, because unless somebody is willing to say, oh yeah, I know, kind of what we're doing or what we're looking for. And if it tastes a little bit different, I don't care. Most people aren't wanting to do that, but you may have somebody do that. I would do it and then compare the meats. And we got some friends of ours that have got some that are fed a little bit different. Um, in that it's a steer versus a bull. And so we're going to compare, they're fed identically. And so we're going to have a little barbecue party one day, and maybe sip on some beer, or you know take back a little bit of whiskey while we're eating the steaks off of both of these animals and comparing them. And that's really, we're small, so we can custom feed these animals. And I mean, when I say custom, I mean by hand. I'm not doing this out of a truck where I'm feeding 100 head and rolling it out there. I've got 30, you know say 30 head, and I'm feeding them 20 pounds a day, and I'm putting it in a trough, and who gets whatever they get gets it, that's where you start to run into a little bit of inconsistency, or can potentially, because you may have somebody who's a little bit more timid, doesn't eat quite what the somebody who's a little bit more belligerent about getting some feed, and one gets a little bit overly fat or a little bit more marbling, maybe a little bit more tender. That one doesn't quite get the tenderness because he's not building up the marbling in the meat. That's a problem, or can be a problem. So when we feed them, I'm feeding them literally. I'm pouring out individually for each one, and it takes time to do it, but your process is better. I couldn't do that with 30 head. I'm not saying that people who are feeding 30 or 100 head or whatever they're doing, that they should do it by hand. I mean, you can't stand there and hand feed these guys.
Right.
Your whole day is spent doing that. There's no efficiency in that. So you do the best you can, but um, I'm always listening to other people. And I don't care whether it's something with horses in that part of our business or the cattle. I'm always listening to what somebody tells me they're doing, or I might ask them what they're doing if they've experienced something, because I'm always trying to learn. And you don't know who you're going to learn from. It doesn't matter who it is. They may have some little piece of knowledge there that you go, I wonder if, or something that spurs that thought process that, hey, I wonder if I tried this, what they kind of did, and do along with what we're doing. I mean, that's just innovation, right? So the whole thing is to be very consistent about what you produce, but try different things. It may be, sometimes it's economy driven. You know, we may need to get
Right.
some cheaper feed. More available feed is usually cheaper. But if it is a matter of giving an animal what they need for our consistency, then I'll spend a little bit more feeding them up to do that. I
Now,
hope that answers your question. But
well, I got some follow-up stuff too because we got about 8 minutes. The two I've got two of them. I'll do the first one is what is something that you've found or you've done yourself that you were like, ooh, that just didn't work out, or you know of somebody that you talked to through the feeding out process that they added an ingredient or a slightly different ratio that it just didn't quite turn out the way that you wanted it to or they wanted it to, and it ended up being either less efficient or not as good flavor or something along that line.
yeah, I've not experienced it ourselves, but listening to someone, and I don't know whether it's true or not. Silage is a very good feed, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's a good forage.
Well, yeah,
Stinky, nasty,
it's mostly
stuff.
filler.
It's yeah, but it's chopped corn.
Right.
And so and what's better than, what's the number one feed in cattle? Corn.
Corn. Yeah.
For feeding, or feeding them out on a large scale. But this is silage, is just a chopped corn. They take as it's matured, and they chop it up and put it in a pile. The top of it spoils, top several inches, and it kind of creates that coating that on the inside you've got good feed throughout the winter. If you've got some bad feed, I think some moldy feed, not really good quality feed, that they can't, or can't get out and forage necessarily, that may introduce a off taste to the meat. I don't know that. That's only what I've heard. We
It
we
would
don't
make
operate
sense
like
though.
that, so it kind of does, yeah. Because what do we put in our corn, oats, and barley to help kind of put a sweetness to the meat? Molasses. It's an
Right.
additive, really, is because they're not eating sorghum on their own, and I don't know how sorghum would be. Very similar to corn, but molasses is distilling down, if you want to put it in those terms, the good stuff out of sorghum. So, and it's sweet. It's like syrup. So we're putting that as an addition into the corn, oats, and barley to try to help sweeten that meat up a little bit. So why wouldn't that also work the other direction if you're not being really careful, or have good feed for somebody, or a feed that's not necessarily conducive to a good taste? Because you'll say you are what you eat. Well, if you're eating nasty tasting silage, and sometimes these cows love it, like some of it. I mean, I've kicked out bales at times for just older bales for cows, not that you're feeding them up for anything, and that tobacco-y, starting to be pre-mold type stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm all about that, and they'll run to it, and it's like, man, that is nasty, but it's a different palatability. They apparently like it. But I think those are probably some of the bigger things. Um, being very careful about your handling of the cattle. And we, like you alluded to earlier, we have had a couple of instances, one or two at the most I can think of, that we had some cattle that were like, no, don't want to do this. And, that's in the loading, getting them to the butcher. And so there's a couple things just to double ensure that they don't know what's going on. Uh, don't treat them any differently. A couple tricks that we can do to keep them quiet. So um, that's really that's really about it as far as what not to do and differences between. But we haven't had any we have not had any failures uh, in the taste of meat. I think your grandpa had a couple that he fed out, and I don't think he fed them enough to just start to get some fat on them, but they were grass fed. So there was kind of that in between where they had that yellow fat in the meat from grass and not the white fat that you would experience from a fully fed out animal. And so they taste differently. A grass fed tastes different than a grain fed or a grain finished. So if you're not expecting that, then that would be something that you want to communicate clearly um, to that, because we had some of that meat that we had split with him, and I was like, wait a minute. He goes, well, it's all grass fat. And I'm like, okay, I was not expecting that at all. So
Uh,
it's kind of
with
funny.
3 minutes left, the second follow-up question: is there something that you have planned or you found that you want to try and experiment in future things? And like, is it like a drastic thing? Is it just like a small change here and there? Like, what are you looking at?
Yes.
Keeping the cards close to the chest. Got it.
No, no secret. There's what we're feeding is no different than anybody else is feeding somewhere, right? It just may be different for us and where we're at. I'd like to try to some processed distiller's grain,
Mhm.
and see how that works. Of course, we'll do that on our own animals, just to see how it is. But other people are having some really good success with that, and maybe a combination of cob and distiller's grain, maybe some peas. Just trying some different things. The problem with it is, with our size, is that turnaround of knowing what it is doesn't happen fast, because we're not
Mm-mm.
continually feeding stuff up.
Yeah.
You know, every week we're not starting a new bunch to warm them up or acclimate them to full feed. So it takes us a little bit time. That's why I talk to so many people and I listen to people and try to find things out. And there's people that absolutely, they're not going to tell you what they feed. They won't do it. They've got a great system, a great product, and good luck getting that out of them. And I understand it, because they've got a niche there that, they're feeding a bunch of cattle up to someone who's marketing their meat. So I get it. I understand. But that's one thing I'd like to try. Some of these distillers grains. We are not putting hormones in our animals. We're not going to do anything like that. Um, we're just as natural as possible, and you know finding out what's in those distillers grains, if there's some additives to
Yeah.
it, and no, I'm going to stay away from that. But it's tough to beat what we have been doing. But you want to be careful when you start getting a pelletized feed. You want to watch what's in it.
Yeah. That is some of the feed out processes that dad has done, experiments, and things we want to do. And we will put that conversation out to pasture.